All right, so here with Seattle City Council member Deborah Juarez. How are you today?
I'm good.
All right, good stuff. Thank you for taking the time out to join us here on the morning update show. Um, Thanksgiving is. I talked to Colleen Echohawk the other day, and I was saying about around Thanksgiving and this time of year, it's uh, it's different in different parts of America because in some places it's all about Thanksgiving, in other places it's really about let's look at indigenous people. Let's look at native people. And Seattle's one of those kind of cities. Seattle's kind of split. You get a lot of Thanksgiving, but we get a lot of native as well. And it's Native American Heritage Month, the
Right.
whole month long here. And we really thought here at the Morning Update show that it was important to reach out to our Native brothers and sisters, especially during Native American Heritage Month, and really talk about Native American heritage. So I again want to thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. And it's nice that we have a month dedicated to Native American Heritage Month besides Indigenous Peoples Day. But probably like you, it should be, I know there's the Black History Month. Um, it probably should just be part and parcel of life that people recognize Indigenous folks and, beyond the performative, I want to recognize them on Indigenous land. It's really a way of living and a way of being raised and how you treat people and how you respect elders and wisdom and age and experience and tradition and culture and language. It's just kind of all part of that. So thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. What is when we talk about Native American heritage, especially here in Seattle? Um, it's so much. There's so many things that are like native in names and cities, locations, and things like that. Almost to the point though that it's not recognized as native anymore. If
Yeah,
that makes
no,
any
it
sense to
does.
you,
It's become
and
anglicized to the point where
right.
we Mount Rainier is like really Mount Tahoma or Seattle and all these, when you hear Alki, those are all from the Lashute language. When I'm back home in Browning, Blackfeet country, it's the same thing. People don't even recognize anymore. We've become part of the scenery, but what's more important is people should know the history behind that and why certain places have names. Um, and like any language comes from culture and landscape and the territory in which you're brought up, and you have names for things. And you're right, we don't always recognize the importance of language in the naming and sense of place and sacredness. And so to have it where people are starting to understand that that's very important. Also for me, we always start when I work for my own tribe and many tribes. We always start our meetings with, Uncle Billy used to say, with an open mind and an open heart, and lead us in a good way. That we recognize we're all going to be at this table. We're all going to have different opinions, but there's some culture and some language and some respectability about how we're going to communicate. So for me, when I would go into like the non-Indian boardrooms, corporate rooms, lawyer rooms, it always seemed odd that no one ever had that coming together first. You know what I mean? That sense of we're here together and now let's go forward. That's always been interesting for me.
Right. Now, when you talk about, I guess you would say that the prevalence of Native culture here in the Northwest, and especially your background, you're out there in New York and Wall Street, and like you said, these boardrooms. How much does economic power relate to relevance? I think I had this conversation with you before that when
Yeah.
I was in high school, I'd go up there to the Tulalip Reservation, and it was the res. And my friends there on the res and off the res up there in Snohomish, I mean, there was little regard for the most part for at least the people that I was rolling with there. But now, the Tulalips get a whole lot of respect in
Oh
Snohomish and
yeah.
across the state.
And they came by honestly and they understood, as we've had these conversations before about economic sovereignty, and you think like a nation, not a reservation. You have a land base and you have kinship and you understand that, you have to you have to integrate yourself into this capitalist society, whether you like it or not, and you can always change it. But it has to be for the betterment and understanding how it works. When I worked for an investment firm and managed tribal money, millions and millions of dollars for a lot of tribes around here and across the nation, it was never lost on me what the priorities were for tribes and where they put their money. And most of it was buying back land, elders fund, education. Those were the big issues where, my non-Indian people I worked with was like, why do tribes want to buy back all this land? Or why do they have a funeral fund? Because we bury our people. That's important. We want to buy back our land to spread our base so we can leverage it to have those kind of brick and mortar on the ground economic engines that are sustainable, because we are the government. And gaming tribal gaming is government gaming. It's not like, what you see in Vegas and other places. Tribes aren't using their money for huge homes and pools and, Escalades. They're using their money for their police, for their jails, for their court system, for their hospitals, their clinics, their scholarship funds. The Puyallup opened their very first, I think 2 years ago, cancer clinic. So that money gets reinvested back into the community with a recognition that our young kids are going to hopefully go to college, go out into the world, and someday come back, because that's our land. We're not going anywhere. And I think that's always been interesting because the non-Indian world is very transient. They want to I'm going to live in Seattle. I may go to Chicago, I'll go to San Francisco, and we do those things too. But we always know where home is, because someday that's where I'm going to go back to Indian country, because that's home.
Right. And speaking of Indian country, excuse me. Do you think that sometimes when people think of natives, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, and especially right around here with Puget Sound, when you talk about nations like the Muckleshoots and you talk about the Puyallups and the Tulalipes, that a general consensus is that people might think that, hey, Native Americans, especially, let's just say Washington State, are doing extremely well because maybe people like the Colvilles aren't out of sight.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I've been watching this obviously my whole life, but Washington State and the 29 tribes in the state has been on the cutting edge, not only in economic sovereignty and gaming, and a lot of it is because some of them are on the I-5 corridor, but they've been on the cutting edge since the 70s in fighting for their treaty rights, an actual right that's theirs, guaranteed under the United States Constitution and the treaties in the 1860s. So some of the best federal Indian law in history, jurisprudence, has been made by Washington State tribes. U.S. v. Washington, the seminal case on treaty rights, and all those also known as the Bolt decision. And I could go on and on, but I don't want to get too wonky on you. But connected to that, and getting back to your economic issue, is it wasn't just the treaty right to fish. It is the economic right to the resources for their people that their elders and ancestors secured via a treaty, and the land base that comes with it. My reservation is, I think, 1.2 or 1.3 million acres. And we have a hotel and a casino and a grocery stores and a hospital and a jail and a court system. But it didn't look like that 50 years ago. So we had to march forward. And that would be true for any group. I think the difference is because tribes have a political relationship with the United States government, unlike other people of color groups. We have a political relationship. And so that brings in more, if you will, I don't say cachet, but an understanding that it's government to government, and that's how we're treated. But again, we also have to be held accountable under federal laws, but we are certainly on par with state law. They do not trump tribal law, and that's something that we've had to push and exercise for in the courts and elsewhere.
Right, but do you think that somebody right now, when you think of Native Americans here, these nations, like I said, around Puget Sound, they're prosperous, they're sprawling, and when you said 29 tribes in the state of Washington, a lot of those tribes are on the other side of the mountains. And they're, and so what I'm saying is it might be easy for somebody to think like, man, the natives are doing great collectively. But, there's other nations here in Washington state that don't have those economic drivers just based on population. Some are in very remote areas. It isn't a big
Right.
population to put a casino or to put things like that. And so
Right.
a struggle still persists for a lot of tribes in Washington state. And I know that which goes on, and we won't go too deep into it, but there's still struggles out there on the reservation when you talk
Absolutely.
about economics, and then even beyond economics. And I want to give you some space to be able to also talk about women that are missing and things, whatever we want to talk about today. I want to give you the space for that. But I'm just drawing a context for people who very well might go to the Muckleshoot, they might go to Tulalip, they might go to Puyallup. They're like, man, these are great for the natives everywhere.
Yeah, that's misleading. I think when people say, oh, the tribes have casinos and they're doing, no, not everybody. And a lot of it is these tribes that you just mentioned were blessed because they ended up on the I-5 corridor. When they did treaty time in the 1860s, they didn't think we were going to be around 100 years from now. And, so it all kind of was because of fate and how the city and the country got built. But getting back to what you're saying about tribes that were like my tribe, no one would ever pick Brownie, Montana to just put a reservation, but they put us out there like the Crow tribe and other folk, thinking that they're going to be in some desolate area. And I think they underestimated the will and basically our kinship and our strength and resiliency to make something out of nothing. And some of the irony there is, they put some of these tribes like ours and the Crow tribe, and I can think of a bunch of others, especially the tribes in Oklahoma. And it turns out they're sitting on millions and millions of dollars of oil and gas. I mean, and then they were like, oh, shoot, we didn't know they were going to do that. And then the tribes leverage that. But getting back to what you're saying, it all starts with the land base and where you're actually sitting at first. It also goes back to the land that the tribes ceded, that they gave up in exchange to, like Yakima. They have their unceded territory, then they have their reservation land. They still have access to that. They still have civil jurisdiction over that. They have the ability to leverage that. But one thing that we've seen in the 20th century, and certainly now in the 21st century, tribes aren't just buying land within the four corners of their reservation. They're investing in hotels in Palm Springs and Washington, D.C. They're buying big chunks of land in cities where they can have a revenue base somewhere else, but the revenue stream comes home. And that's the unseen piece that you don't see about how tribal economics works and how we work. And I was one of those people that would tell tribes when I would advise them, not just on managing their money, but also as legal counsel, I understand your desire to buy our land back. I get that. The Sacred Hills, you want that back. I get that. But let's buy this hotel in Palm Springs because that's a revenue stream. And we can buy it with two other tribes. And then we can use that money for what we need here to sustain what we have here. So even though you may see some tribes, like you're right, some of them don't have the blessing of being on the I-5 corridor. In Eastern Washington, like Spokane and Yakima, I worked with Kalispell when I helped get their land into trust for them to have their casino at Airway Heights. I did that with Governor Gary Locke. And that was a hard fight, and we got it done. Some of the tribes out there opposed the Kalispels. Long story short, you see how it's grown today and what the Kalispel tribe has done. And that's just a kind of innovative thinking. We're not coming from like a survival base, like, we have to have this grant money for this program. It's the long game, the long term. When I represent a tribe, one of the things I do and still do, and I actually did this when I became an elected for Seattle City Council District 5, is you take an inventory of what you physically have. Like I think I shared this with you before. You take you take an analysis and inventory of how big is the land base. For me, District 5, I think it's 13 square miles, 13.8, something like that. You look at what the economic engines are. You look at the population. You look at the level of education, and you look at the institutions. Is there a college? Is there a hospital? You look at those things. You kind of like have your sheet, and then there's where you start growing and how you develop and how you build. That's what I brought from Indian country to Seattle City Council when I realized I was going to represent District Number 5. And I do that citywide too. And I look at, being on Sound Transit, being on Seattle City Council. What are the major economic engines when we talked about the NHL and bringing in OVG and redoing Seattle Center and then putting the NHL Training Center in District 5? It's not really that genius. It's just how I think and how I've been able to bring those kind of skills. My whole life is that's how I've done it in and outside of quote unquote Indian country, and other groups can do it as well. It's not magic.
Mhm. Um, I wanted to give you a moment, and you can share with our audience as well, that when we talk about disparities that now been exposed even more, they've always been there. Of course, we talk about a lot of disparities around COVID in the Black community, and we've done some
Hmm.
reporting about Indian country as well. So, give you a second here to talk about how in Indian country what's happening with COVID, but also the number of people that are coming up missing off of
Hmm.
Indian country, and raising awareness of that nationally.
Right. You know that we, I believe, are the first major city in the country to pass an ordinance for missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, and also have a contract with the Seattle Indian Health Board, and also through the Seattle Police Department and the City of Seattle have a staff person that, in fact, the interviews are going on today, I believe, or actually yesterday, for that staff person who's going to be our data analyst to work with the Seattle Indian Health Board, Abigail Elkohawk, and Colleen Esther Lucero, the CEO of Seattle Health Board. So it's beyond pandemic proportions, and it has been. It's been an invisible pandemic for us for at least 2 decades. So this isn't anything new. Again, it's one of those things where it's kind of like, remember when AIDS happened, and when it was only in the gay community, nobody really cared. But when, housewife Becky in the suburbs got it, then all of a sudden people were concerned. You know what I mean? You know that rhythm.
Mhm.
Yes, drugs are bad if they stay in the city, but oh my God, now there's OxyContin and a drug problem, and people are ODing and fentanyl, and they live in Bellevue. Now it's a problem. And I'm not trying to sound sarcastic and mean, but that is the reality. So our women have been going missing. At least I've known about this issue for almost 2 decades. It's been the last decade where we finally got the momentum, and a lot of it came because of Canada and the studies that they had done to bring it to the national forefront. And now that is where my focus has been, particularly when we go to DC every year in February for National Congress of American Indians. All Native women are back there for that, and that has been the number one lobbying issue for Native, mainly Native women leaders, quite frankly. There used to be a joke a long time ago when I represented tribes, when it was Evergreen Legal Services and the Native American Project, because all the attorneys there, all the male attorneys, they just wanted to do fishing rights. They didn't want to do Indian child welfare. They didn't want to do domestic violence. They didn't want to do economic development. They wanted to just do treaty rights and fishing. And it used to drive me crazy. And they'd say, well, that's what the leaders want. I said, yeah, if you're just talking to the men on council who are fishermen, yeah, that's what they're going to tell you. But there's the other half that you need to talk to, and that's the moms and the aunties and the sisters. And so I think we've come full circle now, and I think we have this momentum. And now with the elections, and hopefully Deb Haaland will be our Secretary of Interior, and now we'll elevate. It's kind of like what African American Black women did for the Democratic Party, Stacey Abrams and all them. It's like that kind of renaissance that has me so excited. Like, yes, finally you're seeing the people that are in the trenches and have been there and are doing the work and making it happen, and not apologizing for it or saying, no, let me step back and let someone else have the credit. So it's kind of the same analogy. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but I've been
No,
thinking a
no.
lot about that.
Um, as a Native American and as a Native American leader, what does Thanksgiving mean to you?
Really, Omari? You gonna ask me that?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Well, it doesn't mean anything. We know the whole story of Squanto and all that, and I I get, I'm actually glad you asked that. I'll tell you what it means to me. This is the memory I have. What it means to me is it's a reminder of being young and being a little kid and being in, Rogers Elementary on the Puyallup Reservation, and hearing the teachers say that Columbus discovered America, and there's this great dinner later and everyone got along. Where in my own mind, I knew that that was a lie, but you just kind of go along with it. And isn't that sad that we accept that, even though I'm like 9 or 10 and I know it's not true? I just kind of go along with it. Nowadays, you wouldn't, right? But when we were growing up, we just got used to people seeing us as invisible, getting the history wrong, whitewashing it, just all kinds of crazy stuff. Because that's just how it was. So when you ask me, what does Thanksgiving mean to you? I always think about the myths, the what is it? The untruths, the it's not an honest holiday. How's that? It's not an honest holiday to me. I understand that
Right.
it's become one because family gets together, but if you look at it on the history, like to me, it's not an honest holiday.
Right. And I mean, it's important, someone of your stature, for people to be able to hear what your thoughts are on, around Thanksgiving. Converge, we kind of like pride ourselves in giving people perspectives of what the other person is thinking. And so, someone very well might watch this and now put themselves in your shoes of being like, oh, I didn't think about it like that. If I was 9 years old, and, and the historical nature of Thanksgiving, and its impact around
Right.
Native
And
Americans.
it's analogous to, and that's why it's a good question. I apologize. I didn't mean to sound negative when you first asked, but it's kind of like looking at a $20 bill my whole life and knowing that Andrew Jackson was the biggest Indian killer murderer, but yet we just got used to him being on a $20 bill. Just like we get used to some of our forefathers that were slaveholders. It's kind of like a sick reality that we know the truth. We do call it out, but we don't dwell on it and spend our lives, do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's kind of like that. I think
Right.
what Thanksgiving has grown into, family, your kids, everyone getting together, enjoying good food, meals, all that good stuff. That's the good side of it. But if you ask me what it means, again, it's not a real honest holiday.
Right. And now, looking towards the future, one of the things that I talked to Colleen Echohawk about was that we see here in Seattle, there's different groups that are kind of working together for larger goals under the BIPOC umbrella. When we talk about housing, like a Chief Seattle Club and an
Mhm.
Africa Town Community Land Trust, these are all the things that grown folks are doing, adults, organizations. And I harken back to when I was young, and my mom would take us to powwows and potlatches and take us to Daybreak Star and make sure
Mm,
that we were lobbying for the native, for the tribe up there in Nia Bay, for their treaty rights, for their
macaw,
well, and all these things. Yeah, and
macaw
so
whaling.
I grew up. Although Black in Seattle, grew up, intertwined with Native culture since I was a little kid, and so there was always a lot of respect and understanding. I mentioned earlier in this interview, I used to go up there to the Tulalip Reservation and
Hmm.
everything else. But, we talk about Black people and we talk about Natives, particularly forging these coalitions here as adults. But where do you think the focus is these days of young people in middle school and elementary school, really being able to understand and appreciate each other's culture like I did when I was in elementary school? So for me, it's a no-brainer when you talk about Native. I mean, I nearly know as much as you, but I could talk and have real in-depth conversations about Native culture here in the Pacific Northwest and some everything else because I grew up around it. And
Right.
it's second nature. And so we see organizations coming together, but what about the youth?
I think what we're seeing now, certainly, and when you say youth, I'm thinking like I'm talking like young children, teens, before
Yep,
that
yep.
millennial stage, kind of.
Yeah, like
Um,
like elementary, middle school. I
yeah,
mean, where
yeah.
you're really learning and can appreciate each other's culture before you get older and cynical and things like that.
Well, they're not thinking the way I thought, where I have to accept the fact that Christopher Columbus discovered America. So we've come a long way. What I see and what I certainly taught in my children is more than a sense of pride, that they're special and they're First Nations people. And they actually believe that. And when they see people who look like me, and certainly now with seeing Kamala, who's going to be our vice president, when they see themselves in positions of power and authority who work hard, they feel that they belong. I grew up as a child, and a few generations behind me is always having to fight to feel like I belong. I'm not an imposter. I'm just as smart as you. I don't see that in this younger generation of children. It's just accepted. And I told you my daughter teaches children in Native and the whole curriculum and of history and culture and books and what are good books to read your children. But there isn't that. It's almost like it's a flourishing, and it's not like we came from like a trauma-based, we have to, we got to fight the power, we got to strive, we got to be shown, we got to be here. They've benefited from the roads that we've created. And, I'm not going to give you the speech of I walked 20 miles in the snow, but I will. I tell my kids that, my adult children that. But they come from a sense of, yeah, I belong here. And this is our history and this is our land. And they also have my reservation schools out here, the revitalization of their language, like out here, Lashute and all these other different languages, has been such a renaissance, and it's been so beautiful watching. And on my reservation, we have 2 immersion schools. So most children on the Blackfeet reservation speak, they're immersed in Blackfeet. They can count, they can, do all the basics more than I can do. And nowadays what I see, and even locally in these reservations, is that those are standard classes. You can get on the Northwest Indian College website and sign up to take Lashute or any of these traditional languages. So what I see in younger people and children is a sense of safety and security and identity and a flourishing, things that I didn't see when I was growing up.
Right. Well, how did we get people here? If we just put it into Puget Sound, Pacific Northwest, and specifically the Puget Sound, how do we now get the general public to have more of an appreciation of Native American culture, specifically even just these nations that are just right here when you talk about the I-5 corridor, beyond just, they have the casino?
Right. I'm so glad you asked that, because I know that you've traveled everywhere and abroad, and I've traveled to many countries. And I know you probably do the same thing I did, is like when I went to Mexico or France or Italy or different countries, and I knew what city I was visiting, I always start reading a book about it before I went there. Right. I would go to the bookstore and get the book on Venice and understand all its history. So when I got there, I knew something. I've done that for many cities. I don't see non-Indian people doing that right here where they live. I don't see them picking up a book from Native American writers and historians to read the very place where they live, beyond the famous quote unquote Chief Seattle speech, which I don't think he actually said that, but that's another story. It would be nice for people to also listen. And you've heard me kind of complain about this, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. When you understand, when you do your indigenous territorial recognition that you're on indigenous land, that those aren't just words. If you understand its behavior, and if you're just doing the words and then not following through with the behavior that you're a guest, then you really aren't absorbing the cultural heritage here in Salish Indian country. Then it's just performative, empty gestures. Because if you really are a guest on someone's land and you make that recognition and you're asking to come in, because that's what you do, then you behave that way. You don't say, I want to recognize them on indigenous land. Oh, by the way, I think you're a corporate whore. That's not how it works. So it would be nice if people could go hand in hand with the gesture and the actual culture and the meaning of that beautiful act. Because every meeting I start with when I'm in Indian country, different tribes, we always recognize that we're guests and thank you. And even when we were in the middle of intense fishing negotiations about who gets to fish where, we never behave like that. So again, we're getting back to what you've heard me complain about before, is like, if you're going to do that, then understand what the words have meanings and the meanings have actions. And also it would be good, and I'm going to give you a little test in a minute here, a little quiz on Native American history, because I have one teed up for you, because I actually took the test and there's 8 questions and I actually got one wrong. I'm going to put Dean on blast here, because Dean took the test and he got 5 wrong, and he works. So let me just see if I can cue this up, sir, because I think it's time that I put you on blast and see what you know. And then there's only 8 questions, and let's give credit to
oh man.
Oh yeah. We're going to give credit to Crosscut, which I thought was pretty cool that they did this. It's called Native History High School Test. Okay. See, here's the test I'm going to ask you now. Here we're teeing it up. You ready? It says, could you pass a high school native history test? Studies have shown that there are concerning gaps in the ways that most schools teach native history. With this quiz, you can test your own knowledge. The questions are adapted from information that you can find in both the River Ridge class and the Washington Since Time Immemorial curriculum. You ready?
No, but I'm ready to go for it. Let's go.
You got 8. Here you go. Number 1. How many federally recognized tribes are there in Washington state? A, 75, B, 17, C, 102, D, 29.
29.
Correct, because I think I said it earlier. Okay. There are 29 recognized tribes. Okay, let's continue. You ready? Question number 2. How many federally recognized tribes are there in the United States? A, 574, B, 832, C, 59, D, 75. 574, 832, 59, or 75.
I'm going to say 574.
Yes. 2 for 2. Okay. Question number 3. When did Native people become U.S. citizens? A, 1930, B, 1918, C, 1924, D, 1887.
Definitely wasn't in the 1800s. It was in the early 1900s. And what were the options? You said
1930, 1918, or 1924.
1918. No, couldn't see it happening then. I'll say 1924.
Dang, 3 for 3. Okay. Someone did their homework.
I got to beat Dean at least.
I know. Okay, here. Yeah, I know you've got to beat Dean. Poor Dean. He's probably dying. Listen. Okay, here. This is a big one now.
Okay.
You need to know this. Which of the following acts divided up reservation land into individual allotments, causing many Native people to lose control of their land promised to them in their treaties?
Yeah.
A, the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. B, the Dawes Act of 1887. C, the Curtis Act of 1898. And D, the Burke Act of 1906.
Right. I think that this initial act was back in the 1800s. The reason why I bring that up is because these guys went to war up there in Montana. And, because the thing is that was a white man's way of thinking. They're like, why would you want to put all this stuff in parcels, dude? And, it's a lot of history up there where you're from, in Montana, are definitely around this act, and lots of violence that occurred there. And some of the people that were instrumental were people that had just come out of the Civil War. So a lot of people came west from out of the Civil War. So it wouldn't have been in the late 30s. So I'm going to pick the date in the 1800s.
Okay, so of the two 1800s, so you think it was either the Dawes Act of 1887 or the Curtis Act of 1898?
Let's see. Civil War ended in 1865. 1887 would have been 22 years after that. Next would have been 30 years. I'm gonna go 1887. I could be wrong, but I think that it was a mass expansion to the west right after the Civil War.
You got it. The Dawes Act of 1887 that divided reservation land into individual allotments. Ultimately, this act stripped away 90 million acres of land from Native communities that had previously been promised in treaties. Much of that land has yet to be restored. Wow. Okay, I'm impressed. Okay, you ready? You got 3 left. In recent years, scholars estimate that around 10 million people lived in the Americas before European contact. Let me read it again. In recent years, scholars estimate that around 10 million people lived in the Americas before European contact. True or false?
Before you're in the Americas, this is a very important question. So it might actually be more than 10 million, because if you say the Americas, you're talking about North America, Central America, and South America, which is massive amount of land there. So 10 million might
True
be
or
actually
false?
might be actually lower. I mean, might actually be higher, but I actually think the number's probably bigger. But I'll go with true.
You gonna go with true?
Mm-hmm.
You sure?
look at you. I gotta call a lifeline now. Let me call Bobby Stills and get a lifeline on the answer.
Call
I
Lena
mean,
Clark. She'll tell you.
I,
Don't call Dean because he don't know.
I actually I think that there had to be more, because when you talk about millions of natives being killed, and at the time, especially when contact was really being spread through there, I mean, it would be different. Like, you had people who were dying because of whatever combat and things like that. So many people died of just a change of lifestyle, change, disease everywhere else, man. And really, I think it's incalculable, the number of people. I
So,
don't.
so is
I'm
your
gonna say
answer?
it's false. I think there's more than 10 million. Me, honestly, personally.
Yes.
Yeah,
You got
I
that
mean,
right.
it had to be.
It had to. Well, you started to say the other one though.
Well, I was saying it, but I was like, yeah, but there was more. It had to be more. In all of the Americas, I
Analysis,
mean,
and then you second guessed yourself. You gave this great analysis about the Americas, and then you second guessed yourself.
yeah, well,
So
I had to think about when we talk about millions and millions of people dying, I mean, then the number had to be more than 10 million.
So it says modern estimates say that the population of the Americas could have been anywhere from 50 to 112 million.
Yeah.
Dang, okay, all right. I see you. You're doing good.
Sounds
Okay, here we
about
go.
right.
Question number 6. You got 2 after this. Before
Mhm.
European contact, native communities largely operated as bands of hunters and gatherers. True or false? Before European contact.
Nah. So, I mean, that question is kind of disingenuous, though, because it really comes down to like the topography of what you're talking about, and the resources that were there. So, I mean, like the Navajos live much differently than the Iroquois.
Yep.
Where you might have had a settlement there. These guys were agrarian society, as opposed to, I mean, that's why you got log houses, and you got teepee. One is like a RV, you get up and go. The other one is like, we're here for the long haul.
Yeah.
So
Blackfeet were on horses raiding like, I get the hell out of our way. We were warlike. We were nomadic. We didn't mess
look at
around. And we're the only tribe that messed with Lewis and Clark. You know why? Because they stole some of our horses and we weren't having it. We're the only tribe.
yeah.
What's your answer?
So
True or false?
then one more. What was the question? One more time. Exactly how it was.
Before European contact, native
Mm.
communities largely operated as bands of hunters and gatherers. True or false?
That also states that, like, they didn't have an understanding of like agriculture and things like that. I don't, man. It's like putting a whole people in a bag. I'm gonna say that's false, man.
Damn, okay. You got that again. Many native people were expert farmers and managed the
Yeah.
lands in which they lived in a myriad of ways. Some tribes, for example, have a long history of conducting controlled burns to manage forest land.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, and that's where it's
here
exactly.
we
That's
go.
what I'm saying.
You're going to get this
Okay.
one. I know it. Only one tribe in Washington has the right to hunt whales, specifically mentioned in their treaty. True or false?
Yeah, it's the macaws up there, Dia Bay, man. You know what I'm saying? Don't be playing with that well
That's
either.
it. There you got it. There you don't touch my
It's in the
whale.
treaty. They need their well.
Nobody's free and willing at Makah. Okay, that's what they were saying. Let me read what it says. It says the Makah tribe is the only tribe in Washington with the right to hunt whales, specifically in their treaty. They reserved this right in the Treaty of Nia Bay in 1855. You can find more information about this practice on their website. Question updated November 17th to clarify the rights defined in the treaty. Yep, that's true. Okay, here you go. Your last one.
All
My
right.
God, you've gotten 7 out of 8 right. Okay, here it all is. The Fish Wars were a series of civil disobedience protests in the late 1800s, where the tribes around the Pacific Northwest pressured the United States government to recognize their treaty-protected fishing rights. True or false?
So here's the thing: is I never necessarily heard of the fish wars, but I do know that the pressure tribes putting pressure on the federal government still is happening today. When you talk about the Colville Nation up there, they want that dam removed that hasn't produced electricity since 1958, and it's blocking the salmon from getting up there further up to the river. And the dam they want removed, I forget the name, but it's right next to Grand Coulee. It's not too far. So from all the way back then until today, the Indian nations have been pressuring the government for fishing rights and for free movement of salmon. Up through the different rivers in the Pacific Northwest, especially the Columbia River and the Snake River and their tributaries. So I've never heard of these fish wars, but I'll say true just because I know it's something that's still happening today.
Wrong. False.
Wrong. Okay.
The fish wars happened. This is my days of takeovers. The fish wars happened during the 60s and 70s, right around the time of the Civil Rights Movement. In fact, and began in Washington State. Remember I was telling you earlier how Washington State, US v. Washington, the Bolt decision. Dick Gregory came and sat with us, Marlon Brando. The rest of the statement is true. Native people throughout the Pacific Northwest led fish-ins and other forms of protest in order to draw attention towards the violation of their treaty rights. So, sir.
Well, 7 out of 8. I still did better than Dean. So,
And that's the crosscut. So tell people to get on crosscut and take now you've already answered. You got 7 out of 8 right. And you could retake the quiz. Good job. Okay. I'm impressed.
I told you I wasn't joking when I was saying I kind of grew up around the culture, man.
I know. I didn't want to. I was gonna show you that earlier, and I thought, no, I'm gonna do it when we're on camera. I was gonna put him on blast to see if he really knows what he's talking about. Good job. You did better than Dean.
There you go. See, Councilmember Juarez. Before we let you go here today, any final thoughts for our audience? Really, that around Native American heritage, Native American Heritage Month, and your work, what you want people to be aware of, anything that you want our viewers to take away.
Well, first of all, I'm putting on my good medicine hat.
There you go.
There you go. Louis Gong, 8th generation, go shop there. And this is we've been saying this our whole lives about people. Some people have really good medicine. Some people have really strong medicine. And I meant what I said yesterday during council, that Seattle and our state and our country needs to heal and move forward with our good medicine and our strong medicine. And I want people to know that they have that in them. And it doesn't have to come out with anger and hate and violence. That judging never changed people, but loving and listening and recognizing the humanity and seeing them when we say, I see you, that is what changes everything. And I think you know that. I think when we talked about John Lewis, you and I before, when he talked about what good trouble meant, that's kind of what good medicine means, and strong medicine means. So I hope for Thanksgiving, I wish everybody not only a wonderful Thanksgiving, I want them to know that 2020 wasn't all about bad medicine. It really came out to also having strong medicine and good medicine, because as a whole, we are genuinely good people.
Amen to that. Councilmember Juarez, Deep 5, thank you so much for taking the time, and happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
I raised my hands to you, buddy, and you did really good. I'm very proud of you. I was expecting you to get half of them wrong. I was so ready to come at you. I couldn't.
No, man. I'm saying